The moment her dress tore, every candle in the ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Evelyn Harper stood in the center of Blackwell Keep's grand hall with both hands frozen at her sides, the silver fabric of her mother's old gown slipping loose beneath her trembling fingers. Around her, music faltered into a broken whisper. Violins softened, then died. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of noble wolves who had come to witness the winter moon ball, but all their polished beauty became sharp and cruel when their eyes turned toward her. Some stared openly. Some hid their smiles behind jeweled hands. Some looked away, not out of kindness, but because pity was safer from a distance. Evelyn could feel the cold air brush the exposed tear along her shoulder and back, and shame moved through her so quickly that her knees almost failed. She tried to pull the damaged fabric together without drawing more attention, but every small movement made the room feel larger, brighter, less forgiving. Beside her, Vanessa Harper pressed a delicate hand to her mouth, her blue eyes wide with an imitation of horror so perfect that someone who did not know her might have believed it. "Oh, Evelyn," Vanessa breathed, soft enough to sound tender and loud enough for the nearest nobles to hear. "I told you that dress was too old for a royal ball." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Evelyn's face burned. She had known coming here was a mistake. She had known the moment her stepfather ordered her into the carriage, not as a guest, not as a daughter of House Harper, but as Vanessa's quiet attendant. She had known when Vanessa smiled at her reflection and called Evelyn the spare daughter no one asked for. Yet nothing had prepared her for the sound of fabric giving way beneath Vanessa's gloved hand, hidden inside a false embrace, timed perfectly at the center of the dance floor. Evelyn could still feel that hand, light as lace, cruel as winter. She lowered her eyes, because that was what an Omega learned to do when power surrounded her. Do not challenge. Do not accuse. Do not make your humiliation worse by naming it. The old lessons pressed around her like invisible chains. Then a chair scraped against stone from the raised platform at the end of the hall. The whispering stopped. Evelyn did not look up at first. She only felt the change. The room, moments ago hungry for her embarrassment, became still with another kind of fear. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. King Rowan Blackwell had risen from his seat beneath the silver wolf banners. He was taller than every man around him, broad-shouldered beneath dark northern armor, his black war cloak falling from one shoulder like a piece of night carried in from the battlefield. His face was pale, sharp, and unreadable, carved in the severe beauty of the northern bloodlines, and his ice-blue eyes were fixed not on Vanessa, not on the staring court, but on Evelyn. No warmth softened him. No smile made him gentle. Yet in the silence of his stare, Evelyn felt something impossible, not pity, but recognition. Vanessa's expression flickered for the first time. King Rowan stepped down from the platform, one measured step after another, crossing the ballroom while nobles parted before him as if the floor itself had become a royal command. Evelyn could not breathe. She expected judgment. She expected dismissal. She expected one more powerful person to look at her and see only a ruined dress, a lowborn Omega, a problem to remove before the evening continued. Instead, the Alpha King reached for the clasp at his throat. The black war cloak slid from his shoulders, heavy, dark, and lined with silver thread. He stopped before Evelyn, close enough for her to feel the warmth it had held, but not so close that she felt trapped. Then, before the entire court, he placed the cloak around her shoulders and covered what the room had tried to turn into shame. The cloak settled over Evelyn like the weight of a storm that had chosen to shelter instead of destroy. For one breath, she could not move. The black fabric was heavier than anything she had ever worn, lined with soft warmth and edged in silver thread shaped like tiny northern wolves. It smelled faintly of cedar smoke, winter air, and steel left too long in the cold. She gathered it closed with unsteady fingers, not because the king demanded it, but because the gesture had given her back the right to stand. The ballroom remained silent around them. Hundreds of eyes watched, but the shame that had nearly crushed her seconds before began to shift into something else, something trembling and unfamiliar. Safety. Not complete, not trusted yet, but real enough that her chest loosened. King Rowan did not ask if she was hurt in front of everyone. He did not make a performance of kindness. He simply turned halfway, placing his broad frame between her and the crowd, and that quiet protection made Evelyn's throat ache more than any insult had. She had not been protected in a very long time. Hours earlier, before the chandeliers, the music, and the unforgiving shine of Blackwell Keep, Evelyn had been in the narrow servants' room behind the Harper estate kitchen, kneeling beside a trunk that still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Inside lay her mother's silver gown, carefully folded beneath a blue ribbon. It was not fashionable by noble standards. The cut was old, the hem had been mended twice, and the tiny moon pearls along the sleeves had lost some of their shine. But to Evelyn, it had looked like memory. Her mother had worn it once at a winter feast, back when people still spoke gently in the Harper house, back when Evelyn's name had been said with love instead of impatience. She had touched the fabric with both hands and almost let herself imagine attending the winter moon ball as a daughter, not a shadow. Then Vanessa's voice floated through the open door. "Do not look so hopeful. You are coming because I need help with my train." Evelyn had turned to find her stepsister framed in the doorway, luminous in a pale gold gown that caught the candlelight like sunlight trapped in silk. Vanessa was everything House Harper liked to display. Beautiful, confident, polished until not a single emotion showed unless she wanted it to. Evelyn was everything they preferred to hide. An omega with quiet eyes, white skin that flushed too easily under judgment, and hands roughened by years of work no noble daughter was supposed to do. She cared for the estate children when they were sick. She mended torn sleeves for servants who had no coin. She delivered broth to elderly pack members during snowstorms, walking half a mile through wind because no one else remembered them. None of that mattered at House Harper. Kindness did not win alliances. Gentleness did not earn a seat near power. "Father says you may wear the old dress," Vanessa had continued, stepping into the room and lifting the silver fabric between two fingers as if it might stain her. "Only because a proper servant at a royal ball should not embarrass us by looking like a kitchen rag." Evelyn had swallowed the answer she wanted to give. She had learned young that silence was sometimes the only roof left over her head. Her stepfather, Elder Malcolm Harper, had made the purpose of the evening clear at breakfast. Vanessa would be presented to King Rowan Blackwell as a suitable Luna candidate. Evelyn would stay close, carry what needed carrying, speak only when spoken to, and above all never draw royal attention. "You are there to support your sister," he had said without looking up from his letters. "Not to be seen." Evelyn had nodded because nodding was easier than explaining that she had spent her whole life being unseen and still somehow blamed for taking up space. Now, standing beneath the glittering chandeliers with the Alpha King's cloak around her shoulders, Evelyn remembered those words with a quiet ache. Not to be seen. But King Rowan had seen her. Not the torn gown, not the lowered rank, not the humiliation Vanessa had arranged with such careful grace. He had seen her, and for the first time that night, Evelyn wondered if being seen by the right person could be more dangerous to her enemies than being invisible had ever been to her. The Winter Moon Ball had been announced 3 months before the first snow reached the lower valleys, and by the time Evelyn arrived at Blackwell Keep, every noble family in the Northern Territories had turned the event into a contest disguised as tradition. The great fortress rose from the mountains like black glass and old legend, its towers crowned with frost, its bridges lit by blue fire, its banners marked with the silver wolf of House Blackwell. Carriages lined the outer courtyard for nearly a quarter-mile, their doors opening to reveal daughters dressed in pearl, velvet, moon silk, and ambition. Each one had been taught how to smile without seeming eager, how to bow without seeming weak, how to let the Alpha King believe the choice was his while every family in the room tried to guide his hand. Evelyn had stepped from the Harper carriage last, carrying Vanessa's white fur wrap and a small jeweled purse that did not belong to her. No footman offered Evelyn his hand. She did not expect one. Snow crunched beneath her thin shoes as she followed her stepsister up the wide stone stairs, keeping her eyes lowered while Vanessa accepted compliments from neighboring packs. "Radiant," one lady whispered. "Surely the king will notice her." Vanessa smiled as if she had been born hearing such things. Evelyn stayed 2 steps behind, close enough to serve, far enough to be forgotten. Inside, Blackwell Keep was warmer than she expected and colder than she feared. Heat poured from long hearths carved into the walls, but the grandeur of the place made every breath feel careful. The entrance hall opened into a ballroom so vast that Evelyn's entire childhood home could have fit beneath its vaulted ceiling. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars. Tall windows revealed mountains glowing under moonlight. Musicians played from a balcony lined with carved wolves, their violins weaving through the murmur of silk and polished conversation. The floor was pale stone veined with silver, reflecting gowns, boots, candlelight, and the restless movement of power. Evelyn had never seen anything so beautiful or so unforgiving. Elder Malcolm Harper paused just inside the ballroom and adjusted Vanessa's necklace, a cluster of moon pearls resting at her throat. "Remember," he said softly, though Evelyn stood close enough to hear. "The king needs peace after years at the border. You will offer grace, stability, bloodline." Vanessa's smile sharpened. "And Evelyn?" Malcolm did not look back. "Evelyn will remember why she is here." The words landed exactly where he aimed them. Evelyn lowered her head and tightened her grip on the fur wrap. She wished, suddenly and foolishly, that her mother could have seen the hall. Not because Evelyn wanted to be chosen, not because she dreamed of crowns or titles, but because her mother would have found one good thing to say that did not make beauty feel like a weapon. The evening moved around her in bright, distant waves. Vanessa was introduced to alphas from western ridges and betas from river packs, to council wives and old generals, to women who measured her with smiles that never reached their eyes. Evelyn stood nearby with drinks, gloves, and patience. Twice, guests handed empty glasses to her without speaking. Once, a young noble stepped backward into her path, causing the tray in her hands to tilt. Evelyn steadied it just in time and whispered an apology even though he had not bothered to look. That was when she first felt the room change. Not because anyone had announced the king. No trumpet sounded. No herald shouted. The music simply softened, as if the violins themselves had sensed winter entering the hall. One by one, conversations faded. Heads turned toward the high doors at the far end. King Rowan Blackwell walked in beneath the silver wolf banners, and the ballroom remembered how small it was. He wore dark armor beneath formal black cloth, the edges marked with silver, and his war cloak moved behind him like night over snow. He did not hurry. He did not perform. His presence crossed the hall before he did, cold, controlled, impossible to ignore. Evelyn looked down at once, but not before she saw his face. Sharp northern angles, pale skin, ice-blue eyes, and a stillness that made every polished smile in the room seem suddenly fragile. Around her, noble daughters straightened. Fathers leaned forward. Vanessa lifted her chin, radiant and ready. Evelyn stepped farther into the edge of shadow with the tray held close to her chest. She told herself he would never notice someone placed so carefully out of sight. Then a guest brushed past her shoulder. The tray trembled, and one silver cup slipped toward the floor. Evelyn caught it before it fell, but when she looked up, the Alpha King was watching her. For one impossible second, Evelyn forgot how to lower her eyes. King Rowan Blackwell's gaze held hers from across the grand hall. Not long enough to be improper, not soft enough to be comforting, but steady enough to make the noise around her fall away. She expected his attention to pass over her, as every noble's did, touching only what glittered, only what belonged to power. Instead, his eyes remained on the silver cup in her hand, then moved to the tray she had steadied, then to her face. Evelyn felt the strange urge to apologize for being seen. She dipped her head quickly and stepped back toward the wall, pressing herself into the line of servants near the shadowed columns. Her heartbeat would not slow. Across the room, Vanessa noticed. Evelyn did not see it at first, because she was too busy pretending that nothing had happened, but Vanessa had spent her whole life reading a room the way hunters read tracks in snow. She saw the brief turn of the king's head. She saw Evelyn's startled stillness. She saw, with a precision sharpened by envy, that the Alpha King had looked past gold silk, pearls, and noble blood to notice the one person Vanessa had brought only to carry her things. Vanessa's smile did not fade. That was what made it dangerous. She only lifted her chin, touched her moon pearl necklace, and glided toward Evelyn with the graceful patience of someone approaching a candle she intended to snuff out. "You are shaking," Vanessa murmured, taking the fur wrap from Evelyn's arm without thanks. "Did the tray frighten you, or was it being noticed?" Evelyn's fingers tightened around the empty stem of a glass. I am doing what father asked. No, Vanessa said softly, still smiling for anyone watching. You are forgetting what father asked. You were told to stay invisible. Evelyn looked toward the musician's balcony, toward the blue fire, toward anywhere that was not her sister's eyes. I did not ask anyone to look at me. Vanessa leaned close, her perfume sweet as frost-covered roses. That is the worst part. You never ask. You stand there with those wounded eyes and make people feel noble for pitying you. The words slipped under Evelyn's skin because they sounded too much like things she had feared in silence. Maybe gentleness was a kind of burden. Maybe the way people softened around her sometimes only made others resent her more. Before she could answer, Elder Malcolm appeared beside them, his expression calm, but his voice low enough to cut. Vanessa, Lord Ashbourne wishes to introduce you to the Eastern Council. Evelyn, fresh wine. And do not linger near the center of the room again. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the task because movement was easier than humiliation. She crossed toward the side table where crystal decanters caught the candlelight in red and amber. On the way, she passed a group of young noble women whispering behind painted fans. That is the Harper Omega, one said. The servant sister, another replied. How embarrassing to bring her here. Evelyn kept walking. She had learned that dignity sometimes meant not giving people the satisfaction of seeing where their words landed. She filled the tray carefully, each glass aligned, each breath measured. When she turned back, the dance had begun. Couples moved across the pale stone floor beneath the chandeliers, velvet and silk circling in elegant patterns, boots whispering over silver-veined marble. Vanessa stood among them like the center of a painting, golden gown bright beneath the lights. One hand offered to a young alpha who looked proud to have been chosen. Yet her eyes kept returning to Evelyn. Then the first royal dance ended, and King Rowan remained near the platform, speaking briefly with his council. He had not danced with anyone. He had not smiled. He had not accepted the hopeful glances cast his way like ribbons. Evelyn tried to move along the edge of the room with the tray, but a nobleman turned too sharply and brushed her shoulder. The glasses chimed. One tipped. Evelyn caught it before it fell, but a few drops of wine touched the floor. She crouched at once with a cloth, whispering an apology even though no one had asked for one. When she looked up, Rowan was watching again. Not the spill, not the nobleman. Her. Vanessa saw it too. This time her smile sharpened. She crossed the floor before Evelyn could rise, her voice bright enough to gather attention. Poor Evelyn, she said, reaching down as if to help. You work so hard hiding in corners. Come, you deserve one dance too. Evelyn's stomach turned cold. Vanessa, please no. But Vanessa had already taken her hand, fingers gentle in appearance, unyielding beneath the glove, and drew her toward the center of the ballroom where every light waited. The center of the ballroom felt farther away than any mountain road Evelyn had ever walked. Vanessa guided her there with a smile bright enough to fool the room and a grip firm enough to remind Evelyn that kindness was not the same as mercy. Around them, the dancers slowed without being asked. Silk skirts drifted to a stop. Boots turned against the silver-veined floor. Faces angled toward the Harper sisters, curious at first, then entertained. Evelyn could feel the court becoming an audience, and the knowledge made her skin prickle beneath the old silver gown. Vanessa, she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Let me return to the side. Nonsense, Vanessa said, her tone warm and sisterly for the watching nobles. You should not hide all night. Even an Omega deserves one graceful moment. The words sounded generous. Only Evelyn heard the blade beneath them. Vanessa raised one hand as if inviting a simple dance, and because refusing would create a scene, Evelyn followed. The music resumed uncertainly, slower this time, a waltz made for polished daughters and practiced smiles. Evelyn knew the steps. Her mother had taught her in the kitchen when she was little, moving between flour sacks and candle stubs, laughing softly whenever Evelyn stepped on the hem of her nightgown. Count the music, not the room, her mother had said. The room can frighten you. The music only asks you to listen. Evelyn tried to remember that now. 1, 2, 3. Turn. Breathe. Do not look at the faces. Do not look at Rowan. But she felt him. From the edge of the platform, the Alpha King's attention remained like winter light on her back, cold and clear and impossible to ignore. Vanessa felt it too. Her smile tightened. She leaned closer as they turned, golden skirts brushing silver cloth. Do you think he is looking because you are special? She murmured. He is looking because pity is distracting. Evelyn's throat closed, but she kept moving. I never wanted his attention. Of course not, Vanessa whispered. That is why it always looks so convincing. The next turn brought them beneath the largest chandelier, where every crystal flame seemed to sharpen the world. Evelyn saw Elder Malcolm near the council table, his expression dark with warning. She saw noblewomen exchanging glances over their fans. She saw young alphas amused by the strange little performance unfolding before them. Then Vanessa stepped in closer, arms opening as if to embrace her sister before the room, a tender gesture meant to soften what came next. Evelyn felt the gloved hand at her shoulder. A small pull, a careful twist. Then the sound came, quiet and devastating, the soft rip of old fabric surrendering under hidden force. The music stumbled. Evelyn stopped breathing. Cold air touched the torn line of her gown. For one heartbeat, no one understood. Then Vanessa stepped back with a gasp so perfect it could have belonged on a stage. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, sorrow painted across her face. "Your dress." Evelyn's hands flew to the fabric, trying to hold it together, trying to make herself smaller than the shame rushing toward her. The room tilted into whispers. Someone laughed once, then covered it quickly. Another voice murmured that old gowns were unwise at royal balls. Evelyn stared at the floor, at the pale stone shining beneath her thin shoes, and wished it would open just enough to hide her. She had not chosen this dress to impress anyone. She had worn it because it was the last beautiful thing her mother had left her. Vanessa knew that. That was why she had chosen it. The pain of that truth settled deeper than the humiliation itself. "I am sorry," Evelyn whispered, though she did not know who she was apologizing to anymore. The apology made Vanessa's eyes gleam. "It is all right," she said sweetly, reaching as if to help and drawing even more attention to the damage. "Some things are simply too fragile for places like this." The words were meant for the dress, but everyone heard what she truly meant. Evelyn's fingers shook so badly she could barely gather the fabric. Her cheeks burned, her vision blurred, not with tears she would allow to fall, but with the effort of holding herself upright while the entire court watched her become a lesson in what happened to girls who forgot their place. Then the music stopped completely. Not faded. Stopped. A chair scraped against stone. The sound cut through every whisper. Vanessa's smile faltered, and Evelyn, still staring at the floor, felt the air change. It grew colder, heavier, charged with a silence that did not belong to embarrassment anymore. It belonged to power. Across the ballroom, King Rowan Blackwell stood. King Rowan Blackwell did not rush. That was what made the room fall silent faster than anger ever could. He rose from the platform with the measured stillness of a man who had commanded armies in blizzards and watched stronger wolves forget how to breathe beneath his gaze. The silver wolf banners behind him hung motionless. The blue fire in the wall hearths seemed to dim. Every step he took across the ballroom sounded clear against the stone, not loud, but final. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered, one hand gripping the torn fabric, the other pressed to her chest beneath the weight of humiliation. She wanted to disappear before he reached her. She wanted the floor, the shadows, anything to open and take her away from the hundreds of eyes waiting to see what the Alpha King would do with the ruined Omega in the center of his court. Vanessa recovered first, because Vanessa always recovered first. She turned toward Rowan with a flawless tremble in her voice. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. My sister's gown was old, and I was only trying to include her." Rowan did not answer. He did not even look at her. That silence stripped the sweetness from Vanessa's words and left them bare in the cold. Evelyn sensed him stop before her, close enough that the polished black of his boots entered her blurred vision. She braced for dismissal, for a clipped command to remove herself, for the quiet cruelty of being treated as an inconvenience at someone else's celebration. Instead, his voice came low and calm above her. "Look at me." Evelyn's breath caught. Slowly, she lifted her face. He was close now, towering and severe, the sharp lines of his face softened only by the way his eyes had changed. They were still cold, still northern blue, but the cold was no longer aimed at her. It stood around her like a wall. "Did you ask for this dance?" he asked. The question was simple. The court heard it. Vanessa heard it. Elder Malcolm heard it from across the room and went rigid beside the council table. Evelyn's lips parted, but years of obedience rose in her throat before the truth could. She glanced toward her stepfather out of habit. Rowan noticed. His jaw tightened slightly. "Do not answer them," he said, softer now. "Answer me." Something in Evelyn steadied. "Not much. Just enough." "No, Your Majesty." Vanessa's smile thinned. She is embarrassed. She does not mean to imply anything. Rowan turned his head at last, and when his eyes landed on Vanessa, the room seemed to lose another degree of warmth. "I did not ask you." The words were quiet, but they crossed the ballroom like a closing gate. Vanessa fell silent. Rowan reached for the clasp at his throat. The black war cloak slid from his shoulders, heavy with dark wool, silver thread, and the faint scent of winter wind. He held it for a moment, not as a king displaying mercy, but as a man making a choice in front of people who had mistaken silence for permission. Then he stepped closer, careful enough that Evelyn did not flinch, and draped the cloak around her shoulders. The fabric fell over the torn gown, warm from his body, broad enough to shield her completely from the crowd. Evelyn's fingers closed around the edge of it, stunned by the unexpected dignity of being covered before anyone demanded she explain why she deserved it. A murmur began at the back of the hall and died the instant Rowan looked up. "The dance is over," he said. No one moved. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her powder. Elder Malcolm started forward. "Your Majesty, House Harper apologizes for the girl's lack of preparation. She has always been delicate, and perhaps she misunderstood her place tonight." Evelyn felt the old shame reach for her again, but Rowan stepped half a pace to the side, placing himself between her and Malcolm's voice. "Her place," Rowan said, "is not yours to define in my hall." The sentence struck harder than any shout. Evelyn stared at the cloak gathered in her hands, at the silver wolves stitched along the edge, and felt something fragile inside her lift its head. Rowan looked across the room, his expression carved from ice and command. "Close the doors." The guards obeyed at once, the great doors shutting with a deep, echoing sound. "No one leaves until the truth has been spoken under moon oath." Vanessa inhaled sharply. For the first time all night, Evelyn heard fear in her sister's silence. The great doors sealed with a sound that traveled through the ballroom like winter closing over a lake. No one applauded now. No one whispered behind painted fans. The same court that had leaned toward Evelyn's humiliation only moments before stood motionless beneath the chandeliers, suddenly aware that amusement could become testimony. King Rowan remained beside Evelyn, his black war cloak wrapped around her shoulders, one hand resting at his side, the other loose but ready, not touching her, not claiming her fear as his own, simply giving her enough space to breathe inside the shelter he had made. Evelyn could feel the warmth of the cloak through her fingers. It steadied her in a way she did not understand. Across from them, Vanessa stood with her chin lifted and her eyes bright with controlled panic. Elder Malcolm moved to her side, his expression smoothing into the familiar mask of noble concern. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "a moon oath is a serious matter. Surely this small embarrassment does not require royal judgment." Rowan looked at him. "A public shame requires public truth." Malcolm's mouth tightened. "My daughter meant no harm." "Then the oath will be simple." Rowan turned toward the priest seated near the eastern archway. "Bring the moon bowl." A stir passed through the room. Evelyn had heard of moon oaths, but only in old pact disputes, never in a royal ballroom. They were not spells meant to punish. They were ancient rites of clarity. A person placed their hand above still water beneath moonlight and spoke. If the words were true, the water remained clear. If not, the surface darkened, revealing deception to every witness. Two priests carried forward a wide silver bowl filled with water that reflected the chandeliers like stars. They placed it on a low stand between Rowan and House Harper. Vanessa's breathing changed. Evelyn heard it because she was standing close enough now to notice what fear sounded like when it wore perfume and pearls. Rowan faced Vanessa. "You said it was an accident." Vanessa's smile trembled back into place. "It was." "Then say it under the moon." For the first time in Evelyn's memory, Vanessa looked to their father before answering. Malcolm gave a small nod, sharp as a command. Vanessa stepped forward, lifting her gloved hand over the bowl. "I did not intend to embarrass my sister," she said. The water shivered. At first it remained silver. Then a thin gray shadow curled across the surface, spreading slowly like ink through snowmelt. A gasp moved through the court. Vanessa snatched her hand back. This is absurd. The bowl is reacting to her omega distress. One of the priests frowned. The bowl does not answer distress. It answers deceit. Evelyn stood very still, the words entering her like warmth after a long freeze. Deceit. Not misunderstanding. Not clumsiness. Not her fault. Rowan turned to Evelyn then, and his voice lowered enough that it felt meant for her before anyone else. Would you like to speak? The question nearly broke her. Not because it was grand, but because it was a choice. Evelyn looked at the faces around her, at the nobles who had laughed, at Vanessa who had smiled, at Malcolm who had spent years teaching her that survival meant silence. Her fingers tightened around the cloak. She pulled me to the center, Evelyn said, her voice quiet but clear. I asked her not to. She held my shoulder when the fabric tore. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You ungrateful little liar. The water in the bowl darkened again, deeper this time, though Vanessa had not meant to touch it. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim around the truth. Rowan's expression did not change, but the room felt the edge of his anger in the silence that followed. Careful, he said. The moon appears to be listening. Malcolm stepped forward. Enough. Evelyn has always been sensitive. She misunderstands attention. House Harper has fed her, clothed her, tolerated her weakness. Something inside Evelyn recoiled at the familiar words, but before they could drag her back into herself, Rowan moved. Not toward Malcolm, not with threat, but with the absolute authority of a king ending a lie. You tolerated her because you could use her, he said. You hid her because you feared what others might see. His eyes swept the ballroom, cold and bright. Tonight, everyone saw. Evelyn felt the court's gaze return to her, but it was different now. Less hungry, less cruel. Some looked ashamed. Some looked stunned. Some finally looked at her, as if she had been a person all along. Vanessa stared at the moon bowl, where the last of her perfect story dissolved into dark water. Rowan faced Evelyn again, and in the quiet, the silver clasp of his cloak brushed against her wrist. A faint glow sparked beneath her skin. The glow was so small at first that Evelyn thought it came from the chandelier light catching the silver clasp. Then it pulsed again, soft and unmistakable, beneath the skin of her wrist where the edge of Rowan's war cloak touched her. She drew in a startled breath and tried to pull her hand back, but the light followed, a delicate crescent forming like moonrise under frost. The ballroom did not move. Even Vanessa forgot to breathe. One of the priests stepped closer, his face losing color as the silver bowl at his feet brightened in answer. The royal mark, he whispered. The words moved through the court with the force of a bell. Evelyn looked at Rowan, searching his face for anger, disbelief. Anything that would tell her this was another mistake she would be blamed for. But the Alpha King was staring at her wrist, as if some hidden truth had finally stepped into the light. His expression did not soften in any ordinary way. It deepened. The cold distance in his eyes gave way to something older, more careful, almost reverent. That cannot be, Vanessa said, her voice cracking at the edges. She is an omega. She is nothing. The moon bowl darkened at the word nothing, as if even ancient water rejected it. Rowan turned slowly toward her. Say that again under oath. Vanessa went silent. Elder Malcolm reached for control one last time, his polished voice fraying. Your Majesty, old magic can be disturbed by emotion. The girl is overwhelmed. The court is overwhelmed. This should be examined privately, away from rumor. Rowan's gaze remained on him. You wanted her shame witnessed by everyone. Her honor will be witnessed by everyone. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the cloak, and the mark glowed warmer. She did not feel powerful. She felt exposed in a different way now, not by torn fabric or cruel eyes, but by a truth too large for the life she had been allowed to imagine. All evening, she had wanted only to survive the ball without becoming a story people laughed about on the ride home. Now every noble in the Northern Territories was staring at her, as if the moon itself had rewritten her name. Rowan stepped closer, still leaving space between them, his voice low enough to steady her before it addressed the room. You are safe. 2 words. Simple. Impossible. Evelyn believed them before she knew how. The priests bowed their heads. The guards followed. Then, one by one, the nobles nearest the moon bowl lowered themselves in respect. Not fully, not yet, but enough for the sound of shifting silk and armor to ripple through the hall. Vanessa stood rigid, her golden gown suddenly too bright, too loud, too fragile against the silence she had created. Evelyn looked at her sister and expected satisfaction to rise. It did not. What came instead was grief, quiet and clean. Grief for the years spent shrinking. Grief for the mother's dress ruined on purpose. Grief for the little girl she had been, learning to apologize for wounds she did not make. Rowan saw her hand tremble. Without touching her, he offered his arm, palm open, a choice rather than a command. "May I walk you from the center of the room?" he asked. The court heard that too. The king of the north, who could order armies across frozen borders, asking an embarrassed Omega for permission before guiding her out of shame. Evelyn swallowed, then placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. The royal mark brightened once, silver and calm. As they moved, the crowd parted. No one laughed. No one whispered. The path that had dragged her into humiliation now opened before her like a road made by winter moonlight. Behind them, the moon bowl cleared, reflecting Evelyn not as a servant, not as the spare daughter, but as a woman wrapped in the cloak of a king who had chosen to stand where no one else had. The walk from the center of the ballroom to the royal platform could not have been more than 80 feet, yet to Evelyn it felt like crossing from one life into another. Rowan moved slowly enough that she never had to hurry, his arms steady beneath her hand, his black war cloak still wrapped around her shoulders like night turned protective. Every step carried her past faces that had changed in the space of minutes. The amusement was gone. So was the easy pity. Some nobles lowered their eyes as she passed. Others stared at the silver crescent on her wrist with open wonder, as if the quiet Omega they had dismissed had become a question their bloodlines could not answer. Evelyn did not lift her chin in triumph. She only kept breathing. That was enough. At the foot of the platform, Rowan turned to face the hall, and the room obeyed the silence before he spoke. House Harper will remain under royal inquiry until the moon oath is complete and every witness has given testimony. Elder Malcolm's face tightened, but he bowed because there was no safe angle from which to refuse a king whose court had just watched the truth darken sacred water. Vanessa stood behind him, pale and still, her golden gown catching too much light. For the first time in Evelyn's life, her sister looked less like a star and more like a mirror that had cracked under its own reflection. Rowan's voice remained calm. "Lady Vanessa Harper will make no claim before this court until the priests have judged her words. Elder Malcolm Harper will surrender stewardship records to the Northern Council by morning. Any servant, dependent, or lower-ranked wolf under his roof may speak without penalty." A low murmur moved through the nobles, not scandal this time, but recognition that justice had begun in more than one direction. Evelyn looked up at Rowan, startled. He had not only defended her from the moment. He had opened a door for everyone behind her who had learned to survive quietly. His gaze met hers, and in it she saw no performance, no demand for gratitude. Only a fierce, controlled promise that what had been hidden would not stay hidden because it made powerful people comfortable. The eldest moon priest stepped forward, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, the royal mark must be acknowledged." The hall held its breath. Evelyn's hand instinctively curled beneath the cloak. Rowan noticed and lowered his voice. "Nothing will be forced on you tonight." The words were private, but the respect inside them felt larger than the room. Then he faced the court. "The mark will be honored, not exploited. Evelyn Harper entered this hall as a guest under my roof, and she was shamed by those who owed her care. That ends now." Vanessa's voice broke through the silence, smaller than before. "She cannot be Luna." Rowan looked at her, and the cold in his eyes returned like winter over glass. "The North does not shame its Luna." The silver crescent on Evelyn's wrist glowed once, clear and bright beneath the chandeliers. The moon bowl answered with pure light. One by one, the nobles bowed, not because Evelyn had demanded it, not because she wore jewels or carried an old name, but because truth had risen in the middle of the room and refused to kneel to cruelty. Evelyn felt tears burn behind her eyes, but they did not feel like weakness. They felt like something frozen finally thawing. Rowan removed the silver clasp from his cloak and fastened it more securely at her shoulder, careful and formal, a public gesture of protection without possession. "You may keep it," he said. Evelyn looked down at the black fabric covering the ruined silver gown, at the old dress her mother had loved, at the mark shining softly on her wrist. The gown was damaged, but she was not ruined. That difference opened inside her like dawn. "Thank you," she whispered. Rowan's expression softened just enough for her to see the man beneath the crown. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for standing." Outside the tall windows, snow drifted over the mountains of Blackwell Keep, turning the world silver beneath the moon. Inside, the ballroom that had tried to make a spectacle of Evelyn Harper became the place where the North first bowed to her name.